Alright, gang, we are back for another Hebdomad Friday Classic. It has been a few weeks since I did this. I think it's been 7 weeks? 7 rings a bell. 6 or 7. Either way, I'm cooked, but the show must go on and all that. And also, everyone else from Hebdomad is going to drag me out back and publicly send me on my way if I don't put a video out at this point. So we're doing a special little thing today because I know I've missed a bunch of weeks. So what we're gonna do is, as the title says, we're gonna do my commander impressions for the Bloomburrow set that just came out today. Except, a little twist. That twist being, I'm gonna give my first impression of every single legendary creature that is debuting in Bloomburrow, which means that this video is probably going to be my longest one, I think. I'm going to try to give at least 45 seconds to a minute at the bare minimum to every creature here. So I'm expecting this video to be somewhat long, but we're not going to know until we get there. Either way, buckle in because this is going to be painful. Yeah. So I'm doing this in the order that's presented me by Mythic Spoiler. So don't expect like a color or alphabetical style sorting. It's going to be mostly random. I apologize in advance for that one. We're going to start with Helga. Helga's a funny little frog person. We have a few frog people, but she's the one that I think is looking better. Because, well, whenever you cast a creature spell, mana value 4 or greater, you get a bunch of stuff. And then she's also a dork, where you can tap her to add mana based on her color. It's kind of like that one dork from Mirrodin, where you tap him to add mana equal to his power. I don't remember the name of him right now. Should have put him in here. But the idea sort of is that the entire deck, you just want to be casting creatures with mana value 4 or greater. And just absolutely pump up Helga. Like this 4/4, bare minimum, you want Helga to be by like, I don't know, like turn 5. I have no idea what I was on to with this one. This is by far this is already my worst take on a commander in the set, and we've just started. But essentially, yeah. So you're in green, so you get access to a bunch of dorks, a bunch of high mana value creatures. You're in blue, which does also give you access to some high mana value creatures, but also some control to help protect your board state and mess with other people. And then white, which just adds to a bunch of protection and gives you a couple other key value pieces in terms of creatures. So you're really just going to be wanting to really step into that green part of the commander to just absolutely maximize the amount of creatures you're getting. And then use blue for like card draw and control and white for some protection. I think Helga can be good. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how people build Helga. I have no idea. I'm not going to build this commander. Next up, we have Glarb, who is another frog. Very similar idea to Helga, except instead of white, we get black, so we get some graveyard shenanigans instead of protection. So a little bit more recursion. And then green-blue, nothing really changes from that. But instead of looking at getting a bunch of stuff whenever you cast a creature with mana value 4 or greater, instead, you get to play stuff from the top of your library if it's a land or a spell with mana value 4 or greater. So it's not limited to creatures. It can be any spell as long as its mana value is 4 or more. And then you can tap to survey too. So less mana options in the command zone, but a little bit more control over your own library / maybe board state. I'm not sure how it's going to translate. I think Helga's a little bit better, to be honest with you, but I'm also not entirely sure. But yeah, it's just the same thing. You just want the 4. I don't know why I put power and toughness there. but you get the idea. You're looking for mana value 4. So just pretend that's a mana symbol. All right. And then obviously you're going to want a bunch of stuff like this, but more expensive. So like think think spells like, well, think big creatures obviously because it's green, but also things like Beseech the Mirror, crazy, crazy in this deck. You can be a little bit more lenient with your lands, especially since you can play lands off your library. A card I'd actually really recommend from this maybe would be Sensei's Divining Top. That might be pretty good. Although again, I'm not going to build this commander. I'm not very familiar with this sort of setup here, so I'm not going to be very good at this one. Anyway, Cruel Claw. Cruel Claw is really funny. I sort of I sort of did a double take when I saw this creature for the first time because it's literally just Atali, um, but smaller. It's just baby Atali because it's worse than Atali, but it's also cheaper than Atali. Like Atali's the kind of commander where if where like it'll be slower to play him theoretically, but if you get him out, the table's kind of screwed. Where this guy is sort of like you can just throw him out almost like turn 2, like for free, and he's just a much faster threat, but the payoff is also much smaller, you know. And also you don't get to cast it for you don't get to cast spells for completely free from your opponent's libraries. It's oh sorry, you don't get to do it from opponent's libraries. It's from your library, um, but you also can discard a card as instead of just paying the mana cost, which is good. But at the same time, it's also not totally free. But that does have the benefit of Mage is that you can sort of work around what you want your deck to look like. So the idea with this is you play Cruel Claw, swing at him, swing with him, get a hit in, and then you just exile into like a massive spell like Worldfire or like something ridiculous, some big spell that you otherwise couldn't cast on like turn 4. That's just gonna absolutely ravage the game. Only issue with that is if you get a bunch of those big spells in your opening hand, or if you draw into them really fast early on, it's gonna screw you. But at the same time, I can see this commander being fairly fun, a little different for a Rakdos identity, but either way, we're gonna do Hugs now. Hugs is a funny Gruul guy, um, and with Hugs, you, you it's not that you're gonna be messing with everyone so much as you're gonna be playing solitaire, um, but not necessarily in the way that you're gonna be comboing for 10 minutes every turn. Just in the fact that your board state is gonna have so much stuff on it that it's gonna look like you're playing solitaire. Um, and that's simply because you have your Gruul, and it has an X value, which essentially just means you can do everything from pumping up X to be a massive number to copying the value of X, doubling the value of X with Unbound Flourishing, similar effects, or you can go the Roaming Throne route and just double the trigger. You can do a bunch of stuff to make that X value or the payoff to it absurd. And then for that turn and the turn after, you just abuse all the cards you exiled, and you're in red. So there's a bunch of stuff for casting cards from exile. So really, the entire idea is you are playing solitaire, except the like extra deck that you draw your 3 cards from. That's your exile pile, and you just use that to absolutely hogwash your opponents. I could see this commander being hilarious. I might end up building them, but I have a commander that I'm already building from this set that I'm going to get to in a little bit. So next up, we got Igra. If I'm pronouncing that right, I really hope so. This is the first Calamity Beast I saw that I sort of went, wow, this is gross. I think it's also the first Calamity Beast I saw in general. Not the last disgusting one, though. A lot of them are gross. But the entire idea with this one is it's got some protection, sacrifice of food, but also every other creature on the board is also a food. And then it comes with the typical food text. And then it comes with the additional text that whenever a food goes in the graveyard from the battlefield, you put 2 counters on Igra. So the idea with Igra is you're an IHOP customer. Like they think of the table that you're playing Igra at as an IHOP. You're there. You're in the IHOP. You're the entire idea here is that you eat everything. So realistically, in terms of what cards you want to be playing, something like you play Igra, right? And then you play something to decimate the board while keeping Igra alive, mind you. You want to keep Igra alive while like board wiping. So like if you can like say put a mithril coat on Igra and then just cast a random black like damnation or something like that. Just completely wipe the board while leaving Igra up, and then Igra just becomes like a 30-30, and you just swing for lethal, just murder someone in cold blood. That's the entire idea. You just become the immovable buffet consumer. It's ridiculous. I do kind of want to build this one, but again, one thing at a time. So, next one, Beza. Beza's funny because Beza is just like Wizards saw land tax and the response to land tax, and they were like, okay, but what if we took land tax and we made that entire idea of stealing off of someone else's success to make yourself better into a commander? Like the entire deck is just that. So it's literally just the younger sibling after you get an Xbox or a PlayStation. Just it. Oh, you're having fun with that? Awesome. Now we're having fun with that. Not like I'm stealing it, but it's just now that someone else is doing better than you have that inferiority complex come up, and now you're just nope, mine now. I need some of that. I'm not taking from you, but I'm getting some as well. So that's just interesting like that. Mono white is a hell of a move. Um, as a in terms of being a calamity beast, this one's tough. I I will not build this, but I am really curious to see how people will. I think land packs in this would be hilarious because that it's just perfect. That's just perfection. But yeah, the entire idea here is you just profit. You just profit. I have no idea how you would even build this commander aside from just mono white value. That's probably how you do it, to be honest. I don't know, maybe double the tokens of the fish. A lot of ETB triggers, I bet, like Cloudstone Curio and M. I mean, actually, you can't even run out of ML, but yeah, just put Pez in the 99. I don't know. Um, anyway, Eluge, much better Calamity Beast, although also not that great. Uh, 4 mana, mono blue, power toughness equals the number of islands you control. Very interesting. So it can be very, very big, but whenever it enters or attacks, you put a flood counter on a land, which makes it an island. This is very interesting because island walk, island walk blue creatures rejoice, but it's got more. So the first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs a blue less or one generic less to cast for each land you control with a flood counter on it. So not every island you control, every land with a flood counter on it. That's really interesting because all we do is cast expropriate. That's the video. No, I'm kidding. Um, but on a real note, Eluge is really interesting because it wants you to have a lot of islands, but at the same time, you can put a flood counter on any land. So it doesn't have to be your lands. So it's like the first two, the first and the third ability are just like we want flood counters on our lands. And then the second ability just also gives you that flexibility. Although at the same time, I'm almost wondering if it's a waste because, like, at least the second ability, putting flood counters on your own lands, just because theoretically, if you're playing mono blue, you're going to be putting a lot of islands down to begin with, or not a lot, but I mean, most of your lands are probably going to be islands, right? So it's just a really interesting thought, like how, like, does that make the bonus not negligible, but it lessens it? I don't know. I'm almost wondering if you play this deck a lot, like you just have a lot of non-basic lands, and then you play this and you flood all of your non-basic lands. So now they all can do the funny thing that the non-basic lands do, but at the same time they're also islands, so they all count towards Eluge's first and third ability. Maybe. Either way, you know what? Just cast Expropriate. Be done with it. It's funny. Cast it for free. Why not? Either way, Maha's dumb. Anyway, so Maha is a 5-cost mono black creature, flying trample, ward, discard a card. Creatures your opponents control have base toughness 1. This is hilarious. Mostly just because everyone's gonna hate you. This is the commander that I definitely see everyone sits down for a table of commander, and we're all talking about what the commanders are that we're playing, and someone just goes, "Oh well, I actually just built this Maha deck, and I want to try it out." Everyone everyone is gonna jump you. It's gonna be a scene from Jujutsu Kaisen. You are gonna get absolutely mauled by everyone the second Maha hits the table because all their fun stuff is gone. So I am a little bit cautious about using this card as a commander, but I could also see this card doing really well in the 99 for like a Toxrill deck. So I don't know. I'd be careful with this one, but if you do want to put it in the commander, Masker Worm or anything that gives creatures -1/-1, either until end of turn or permanently. So Masker Worm, Meathook Masker. There's a bunch of black enchantments that do that, and then just death triggers. Like you put Drivdon down to double your death counters, and then just a bunch of stuff like Blood Artist, anything like that. So there's like mono black shenanigans. You guys know the drill. Anyway, next up we got Dragonhawk, my beloved. This is the commander that I have already made a deck list for and am currently building. I'm just waiting to get my hands on Dragonhawk once somewhere around me has a single available. But this was really interesting. So it's a 5-cost mono red with flying. It's a bird and a dragon, which can be important depending on how you want to build it. But the real kicker is whenever Dragonhawk ETBs or attacks, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. So it's 1 by default because Dragonhawk has 5 power. You can play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, Dragonhawk deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. So, first thought I had here is this is just the US defense budget, and we're going to nuke everything. So, the idea here is, like, you want to get a bunch of creatures with power 4 or more, play them, profit. So, like, on a real note, you want a lot of mana and a lot of big creatures. That's sort of it. In mono red is a little bit harder than mono green. We don't have a lot of access to mana dorks or big creatures that are typically cheaper like green does, but we do have a lot of options for mana because we're in red. We don't necessarily need the dorks. First thought that comes to mind, Doxa Extortionist. Very expensive card, very worthwhile card. Another thing that comes to mind, any of the rituals. Keep in mind, you can have them in your hand, or you can get them exiled with Dragonhawk, play them from exile, go ballistic, go nuts. Or don't, and Dragonhawk just absolutely flays everyone at the table for not playing it, because it deals damage. So, my play for this guy is You got three themes going on, and they all sort of link into each other. Big mana, big creatures, and damage increasing. So, big mana, rituals, treasure tokens. Big creatures, kind of dragon tribal, though not really. More so just focusing on creatures that help you cast things from exile and creatures that help give you treasures while also being power 4 or greater. And then damage increasers, so Sulfim, Gratuitous Violence, Fiery Emancipation, uh, that one Isengard card from the Lord of the Rings set that triples your damage to end a turn. All that stuff. You just want to absolutely make your opponent suffer from exile, of course. But yeah, I'm going to put the deck list for Dragonhawk that I have right now in the description. Let me know what you guys think. I really like it so far, but I'm waiting to actually play it. So, and now we got Lumra. Lumra, kind of similar to our other Calamity Beast that was mono blue, but more expensive and kind of a different idea here. So, Vigilance Reach, Power, Toughness equals number of lands you control. On ETB, mill 4, return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. First thing I have to say about this guy. Lumra does not care about the cards that you mill so much as how many lands are already in your graveyard when you mill. So you can mill 4, have none of those cards be lands. Doesn't matter. If you have like 15 lands in your graveyard already, they just go on the battlefield. So what we want to do is we want to play solitaire just like with Hugs. But you get the idea. Make Lumber really big, crash her into something, profit. It's mono green. Big mana, big creatures, you know the drill. So, actually, before I move on, some creatures that I think would really work with this or some planeswalkers I think would really work with this, would be Nissa, who shakes the world, and Renin 7, I believe. Because Renin 7 works directly with the graveyard and with lands, and Nissa doubles your output of forests and has an ultimate that can tutor every forest from your library onto the battlefield. Very, very important cards for Lumra if you want to build that as your commander. I would highly suggest that. Other than that, go wild. Anyway, Balin. Balin is just a Naya token commander. Sorry. First thing, tap 2 untap tokens, add mana, tap 3 untap tokens, draw a card, tap 4, put counters on Balin and against trample. So the idea here is you just want stuff like this, and stuff like this, and stuff like this. Aside from that, spells that make tokens, you're in red. You get a lot of spells that can make tokens. You're in green. You get a lot of stuff that can get you mana or get you tokens. I'm thinking Arasta in green, just saying. And then you're in white. So protection, more tokens, and then the doublers like Mondrak, Primal Vigor, Parallel Lives. You're good. You're good. There's a god that came out in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan that triples creature tokens specifically. I'd say go for that. But the thing is, you don't have to just do creature tokens, okay? It just says tokens. So if you want to do treasure tokens, because you're in red, you play Dockside. Actually, you can play Dockside Emil or Dockside Cloudstone if you want to do Infinites. Either way, you just get a bunch of treasures, bunch of food, bunch of creature tokens, what have you, and just go wild. Just tap all of them. Just make sure you give them haste, or if they're creatures, or they just enter untapped. Aside from that, you're good. Just give Balin haste, and you're off to the races. Anyway, we got Gev. Gev, my beloved. Gev is just a little guy. 2 mana, Rakdos, ward pay 2 life. Other creatures get an additional +1/+1 counter on them for each opponent who lost life. So, in a standard pod, other creatures could enter with even up to 3 +1/+1 counters, which for Rakdos is pretty good. And then whenever you cast a lizard spell, Gev deals 1 damage to target opponent. So the two abilities just sort of go hand in hand. Um, I don't see this guy being a commander, to be honest, but I see him working really well in Rakdos. Like the guy Rakdos, the commander Rakdos. I can see this guy working really well with him as like a little pet card that sort of just slots right in. You play him, you cast. I don't know. You could cast lizards with that, deal damage to an opponent, and then profit, or you just put Gev in as a lizard tribal commander, which also totally works, probably just as well. But I do see him working somewhat well in a Rakdos, or in the very least in a life steal, or not life steal, but damaging deck. In a burn deck, Gev just works really well for augmenting your creatures. Anything that comes in that will help you with damage, Gev's your guy. Anyway, we have Bren. Bren is the Rat Man. Vren is a 4 mana Dimir Ward 2 creature, which exiles things that die under your opponent's control, which is really interesting. But it also has the feature of, at the beginning of each end step, you create a number of 1/1 black rat creature tokens with the Relentless Rats ability, where X is the number of creatures that your opponents had that were exiled this turn. So, playing Solitaire, right? I've done this before, except it's with rats. We love rats. So, you could do this a couple different ways. You could just rely completely on the rats that Vren generates and just board wipe everything. Or you go rat tribal and you just kill things that your opponents control. So just you get the idea. Just kill things. Just kill things, make rats, repeat. You're in Dimir, those are the two colors for killing things. Well, Rakdos is the two-color thing for killing things. But Dimir works almost as well. Dimir is going to be really good for killing stuff, making stuff, control the board, make them hate themselves. Dimir is really good for that. Play rats. That's all I have to say about it. Anyway, Zorline is funny. And the fact that Elesh Norn automatically appeared on the slide tells you all that you need to know about how you play Zorline. But not the original Elesh Norn, the ETB Elesh Norn. Because while Zorline has the ability where whenever it enters or attacks, you can pay 2 mana and 2 life, returning a non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it, which is an absolute mouthful. The problem is you can't really abuse the attack triggers with Zorline, mostly because Zorline is Orzhov. You know what you can abuse in Orzhov color combos, though? ETB triggers. That's right. So the Flying Vigilance, bats attacking to give you a life, that's good. But ETBs, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So my first impression is you play a lot of ETB stuff and you just become Batman. I did that wrong. But you know what? You get the idea. Elesh Norn is Batman now. Confirmed. Either way, we're moving on. Castrol is Birdman. That's a horrifying image. But for an Azorius commander, that's pretty on point. Either way, 4/5 flying, whenever one or more birds you control. So keep in mind, it's not for every bird you control. It's just when the bird mob, whenever they deal combat damage to a player, you get one of 3 effects. So you can recur a bird to the battlefield with a finality counter. You can put a +1/+1 counter on each bird, or you can draw a card. So I guess this is just bird tribal value in Azorius. I'm not too impressed, to be honest with you. But I don't know. It could be decent if someone really wants to build Castrol. You never know. I could be totally wrong on this one, but it's just not doing it for me. So we're gonna do Moira. Oh, Muera, I think. I'm gonna get dogged on for that for that pronunciation, but we're gonna stick with it. It's a Gruul raccoon, which has at the beginning of your first main phase, you add a red or green for each raccoon you control. Whenever you expend 4, you gain 3 life. Expend, I think, is a new feature, or it's a new mechanic for Bloomburrow, where it just refers to how much mana you spend on casting spells during a turn. So it doesn't specify your turn, just a turn. So whenever you spend 4 mana on casting spells during a single turn, you gain 3 life. Whenever you spend 8 mana on casting spells during a single turn, you exile top 2 cards of your library, and then until the end of your next turn, you can play those cards. So what we're all I'm thinking what I hope we're all thinking with this one is you're just in Raccoon City. This is a Resident Evil joke. Please thank me. I don't know. Uh, so grape shot, yes. Sorry. So the idea with this commander is you want mana, which you're in Gruul. You get a lot of that, and then you want to be casting a bunch of spells. So what what you do at that point is you just make a lot of raccoons, and then you spend a lot of mana on casting spells. I'm sorry, I don't really know what I was going off on here. Moira doesn't really do it for me either. So we're 0 for 2 on that one. But at the same time, Raccoon Tribal, I think Moira will fit really well in the precon that has a Raccoon Commander. That is, if they're not in it already. I haven't checked the deck list for the precon, so they might already be in that deck list, and I could just be rambling on about whatever. But either way, cool card. Not really into it as a commander. The thing is with this list, I'm pretty sure before we get to the precon cards, they're gonna generally get worse as we go down the line. So I'm gonna be struggling a little bit more as I continue this video. So I apologize in advance for that. But we're just gonna go for it. So next up we got Phineas. That's funny. I don't think there's a Ferb card in this set, but either way, 2 mana Selesnya Rabbit. Vigilance Reach. Whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control that's a token or a rabbit. So, token tribal or rabbit tribal. Pick your poison. Then, if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater, draw a card. So, what we're doing here is, yeah, you guessed it. You guessed it. We're doing tokens because I don't know how many rabbit cards there are in Magic, but I can promise you they won't be as good as the tokens. But yeah, it's just the Easter Bunny deck. You just play a bunch of tokens and perhaps rabbits. I could be wrong. And then you just attack everyone and everything. Just keep in mind you're gonna look like this the entire time at the table. Just saying. Just giving you a heads up. Either way, moving on, we got Alania, who is an Izzet Otter, which is giving me some serious Ral vibes. But either way, 3/5, whenever you cast a spell, if it's the first instant spell, sorcery spell, or otter spell other than a land you've cast this turn, you may have target opponent draw a card, and if you do, copy that spell. So, one thing to note about this, you can choose the opponent who draws the card, and they don't choose to draw the card. It's your choice. So, if you feel like they shouldn't draw a card off of it, then they don't. But if you're casting something that's really strong, you can sort of game plan who's the best person to draw a card off of this right now. Like, you don't want the blue player drawing a card off of this in case they draw into a counter spell. But if like it's a mono green player, just saying. I love green, but they have so little stack interaction in this particular field. But this is sort of the idea here. You might be familiar with this. Yeah, we expropriate them, and then you copy it. You play expropriate and you copy it. Or you play Nexus of Fate and you copy it. Either way, you want to play Alonia, you're going to get a masterclass on how to be a horrible human being. But do you play Izzet, so you can also just do Storm, which Alania seems pretty decent for Storm. A little expensive for what she does, although I could be wrong. It just seems like the thing you'd want to go for this is perhaps a little bit more expensive on the mana side of things, or you could just go with damage. You could just play instants and sorceries that do a lot of damage. There was an otter that dropped in Bloomburrow that I'm thinking of. I don't remember the name of it, but I believe it copies itself whenever you cast a spell. I'd have to look into that, but I think stuff like that's going to work really well. So copying, storm, that kind of stuff, that's what you want to put in this deck. And then, yeah, expropriate, because expropriate's funny, and I'm a bad person. Either way, Camellia. Camellia is a squirrel. That's all you need to know. Either way, she's got Menace. Squirrels have Menace. Whenever you sacrifice one more foods, create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So, interesting thing to note here, if you sacrifice all of your foods at once, you'll only create one squirrel. So you probably want to sacrifice your foods individually, you'd think. And then you can pay 2 mana to forage, and then put a +1/+1 counter on each squirrel control, which is decent. I can think of one thing you can use for Camellia, and that is Chatterfang. That's to say that Camellia goes in Chatterfang, not the other way around, because Chatterfang is better. But you get the idea. Camellia is a pretty good support card. Interesting choice for a commander if you're doing, especially since you're doing Squirrel Tribal. But it'd be interesting to see how people play out with her. Again, you're going to hear it a lot in this video. I could be wrong. I'm not very familiar with the ins and outs of token decks and squirrels. But I do think Camellia would be a good asset to have in a Chatterfang deck. Not necessarily as a commander themselves, but I do think it's a good card. Either way, yeah, you get the idea of token generation. Mabel has a lot of text, and I am not sure that it does a lot of things for Mabel. So the 3/3 mouse, other mice get +1/+1. Whenever Mabel enters, you create an artifact called Cragflame. It is a legendary equipment that gives the equipped creature +1/+1, vigilance, trample, and haste, and the cost is equipped 2. So Mabel, I don't. The only thing I could really think of when I was making this video is just buff Demon Slayer-esque mice. And asides from that, I don't really know. I mean, Mabel buffs mice, and Mabel makes a pretty cool equipment, so maybe Voltron? I mean, you're in the colors for Voltron, you're in red-white, so you could theoretically do him as a Voltron commander, but at the same time, there are better commanders for it, but I think you could totally do it. So, yeah, probably Voltron is actually the best way to go through that. Either way, we're going to do Clement, who, oh my god, I did not, this was not the plan, but essentially, whenever, Clement is a frog, in case you didn't notice, but whenever you cast a spell, essentially, let me look this up, hold on. I apologize, this is an informal intermission. I'm not going back and editing this. I'm already too far gone. So, okay. So Clement is a 3/3 with Vigilance. Whenever Clement or another creature you control ETBs, return up to one target creature you control with lesser mana value to its owner's hand. So, bouncing things, question mark, and then frogs you control can tap to add a green or a blue. So, Cynic Shenanigans. This is an interesting one. I am at a loss for the specific deck list I would come up with this, but I could definitely see how people would run this as a commander and get really creative with it. So the first thing I could think of is just you're just Toto, and you just swap things out with the Toto ability. You just boogie woogie everything with the unsummoned tech, and you just make the frogs buff, but not as in making them stronger, but as in making them more useful. That's really all I got for Clement. But fun card though. So I see what they were going for with this. It's definitely interesting. Either way, we're gonna do Wick. Uh oh. Uh oh. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Wick is the rat commander. So you just play rats. But before we get into the rats, whenever Wick or another rat you control enters, you create a black snail creature token. If you don't control a snail, if you do control a snail, which is going to be the token that you would generate, you put a +1/+1 counter on a snail you control. And then you can pay the Grixis colors, which makes this a Grixis commander, and sacrifice a snail to have Wick deal damage equal to the snail's power to each opponent. And then you draw cards equal to the snail's power. So you play rats, and then you kill the snail at some point. So you play an obscene amount of rats. Amass the snail to become larger than Nico Bolas's entire army. Sacrifice the snail, and then kill everyone for a gajillion damage. The first thing I can think of when we're looking at making the snail big is Rat Colony, Pitiless, Fire Action Altar. You win. You just do that. And before you question me, just know that I don't actually mean rat colony. I mean reanimating skeleton. You can actually return. Actually, oh my god, that doesn't even work. You know what? You know what? Just sacrifice things. Just sacrifice things and then make mana and then play snails. Okay? I completely misread this card and restless rats. So just sacrifice things and play the snail. Then kill everyone with the snail. Either way, we're gonna go to Arthur now. I think this is a. I'm not sure if this is a card that comes in the precon, but it's giving me the vibe that it does. Either way, it is a 4/5 mouse, which means that you could probably actually run Mabel in this to buff them. But whenever Arthur and at least one other creature attacks, which is pretty easy because Arthur has haste, you look at the top of this card to your library, and then you can put a creature card from among them on the battlefield attacking, put the rest on the bottom of your library, and then return the creature that you just put on the battlefield to your hand at the end of combat. So Arthur gives me the vibe of Winota, but like nerfed. Like really nerfed Winota. So you get access to blue, right? Which is cool, but you need specifically to attack with Arthur and one other creature, which only gives you one trigger for looking at the top of your library. Whereas Winota just does it whenever a non-human creature attacks. So I think that's interesting how you need to attack with your commander and then one other creature, and then you only get one trigger, but it costs the one more because of the blue. It does get haste though, so that's nice. I don't know, I just think that's interesting. But so I guess you could run Arthur kind of similarly to Winota, except you don't need to focus on the non-human human dual aspect of that. You just run creatures that can attack quickly with Arthur and then plop down a really big creature and just get payoff off of your combat. So probably extra combat triggers. Either way, we're going to flubs. You can tell that I'm unraveling here. So I've been doing this for too long. Flubs is a Teamer frog. We're back to the frogs now. It's been a long time since we did frogs. Either way, 0/5. You can play an additional land on each of your turns. Whenever you play a land or cast a spell, You draw a card if you have no cards in your hand. Otherwise, discard a card. So, I'm supposing the idea here is you just play a bunch of lands and cast a bunch of spells. You end up discarding your hand, and then at some point, you just start drawing and discarding in a cycle, a never-ending cycle. So, best thing I can think of for flubs is Underworld Breach, so they can re-access all those cards that you're discarding, because you're going to discard some value at some point. Whether you want to or not, it's going to happen. But you do have ways around it again with Underworld Breach. So you're in green, you're in blue, you're in red. You have access to a bunch of mana, a bunch of card draw, a bunch of damage if you're looking for that. I can also see this being more so of a cycling deck. So you can just sort of almost not quite go through your library the whole time, but you can sort of move fairly quickly through your deck to sort of find your value pieces and either choke them onto the battlefield or throw them in your graveyard for some reason. And then, yeah, you just need a lot of mana. That's the one weakness of this deck. You need a lot of mana to make this work, which you'll get because you're playing a lot of lands. But at the same time, then a lot of stuff's going to end up in your graveyard. So mana efficiency is probably going to be a really good thing for you. Yeah, Flubs is an interesting one. Either way, Mr. Foxglove, I actually like this guy. I think this guy's pretty cool. So he's a 3/5 green, white, blue with lifelink. Whenever he attacks, you draw cards equal to the number of cards in the defending player's hand, minus the number of cards in your hand. So, if you didn't draw cards this way, you may play a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. So, you have one of two options here. Either A, you have less cards than your... sorry. Yeah, so if you have less cards than your opponent, then you draw cards. And if you don't, if you have more cards in your hand than your opponent, you don't need more cards, you just play big creatures. So the idea here is that no matter what, as long as you're attacking with Mr. Foxglove, you win. Like, you get some benefit to attacking with him, either in the form of cards or in the form of getting to play a creature from your hand. So essentially, you're playing blackjack with whoever you're attacking, and either A, you got a bunch of cards because there's nothing in your hand and you're attacking the guy with 20 cards because they're playing mono blue, or you play Godzilla because you already have 10 cards in your hand and you don't need anything else. So you just play a 15/15 for no mana and you just GG. That's it. So Mr. Foxglove, I think it's pretty cool. The fact that he's in green makes the entire big creature clause possible, which I think is going to be really interesting. Either way, we got the Odd Acorn Gang, which is a 5-color Golgari, or 5-mana Golgari squirrel creature with Menace, Trample, and Reach, giving squirrels the ability to tap to give a target squirrel +2/+2 and gain Trample until end of turn. And then whenever one or more squirrels you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So again, it's not based on how many squirrels you control, it's just based on when the squirrel mob deals control to a player, you draw a card. And then the thing that I'm really getting with this is you get a bunch of tokens and you tap all of them to make one big creature, one big squirrel, that is, being a commander. So it could be the Odd Acorn Gang, or it could be Chatterfang. Just hear me out. Just hear me out. Just hear me out. Chatterfang is just going to be better in the command zone, I think. I could totally be wrong. But either way, I think no matter how you play that, it's going to be interesting. So either way, next up we got... I'm tripping. Either way, Chatterfang's on trend. That's the entire video. See it? No, I'm kidding. So Burke is the next one we're going with, who is interesting. I think Burke was the first commander the first legendary creature. I was trying to be fancy with that. The first legendary creature that I saw for Bloomburrow when the spoilers first came out. It's a 6 mana Selesnya creature with vigilance, and whenever it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. And then whenever a creature with counters on it attacks, you double the number of counters on it. This is a fairly simple impression for me, as someone who played a lot of green and used a lot of counters. The simple answer is you play Colonian Hydra, and then you go Hydra Tribal, and you profit. Will you need a lot of mana? Yes. Will you need a lot of Hydras? Yes. Will you win the game? Also yes. You'll just win. You'll be fine. You play Colonian Hydra, you play like 5 other Hydras, you play Burke, everything gets doubled, everything gets quadrupled, and then everything's a 60/60 Hydra with trample, and then you just kill everyone. Either way, it'll be fun, trust. Next up, we got Wilds here. The Nyxbloom Ancient is going to tell you everything you need to know about this commander, because we're playing enchantments, a lot of enchantments, mostly because enchantment spells that you cast from your hand have Cascade, and with that being in your command zone, that essentially means that every single creature, every single thing you play should be an enchantment, and if it isn't an enchantment, then it better be doing a lot of work. It better be a Soul Ring or a Jeweled Lotus. It better be something good, because either way, you're playing the Nyxborn Behemoth, you're playing the Nyxbloom Ancient, you're playing everything. You're playing all the enchantments, and then you're cascading with them. So you're in Gruul. You have a lot of mana. That's good. And then you get all the enchantments. Congratulations. I don't know. Either way, Hazel, one of the precon commanders, I believe. Interesting Golgari Squirrel. Tap, pay 2 life, and you create X untapped tokens. You tap X untapped tokens you control to add X mana. So it's a dork. I don't know why I'm screwing that up. Then at the beginning of your end step, you create a token that's a copy of the token you control, and then if that token is a squirrel, you create 2 instead. I'm not even gonna go into detail on this one because it's just been the same as all the other squirrels. You just play Chatterfang. That's it. Either way, next up, Bellow, aka Rocket Raccoon, is the Gruul precon commander, which has a Mishra-like effect because during your turn, each non-equipment artifact, each non-aura enchantment with mana value 4 or more becomes a 4/4 elemental creature in addition to its other types, gaining indestructible, haste, and when this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So basically, you're aggroing with artifacts and enchantments. So you don't really need a lot of creatures, aside from the Raccoon City you're getting if you play this just with the precon. But realistically, you could probably get this deck off just with the mana value for greater artifacts and enchantments. That's really all you need. Zinnia, interesting blue, red, white commander, which it looks weak, but the thing is, it gets plus X plus 0, X being the number of other creatures you control with base power 1. And then creature spells having Offspring, which lets you pay an additional 2 mana to cast a creature. When you do that, you get a 1/1 token copy of it. Zinnia's interesting because you can essentially just play a bunch of creatures with base power 1 and then buff Zinnia just off of that. And that's it. So that's pretty cool. The only problem I have with it is the fact that it's not green. So you miss out on a lot of the dorks that would really make this commander just move really fast and just buff itself really fast. But alas, I don't really know what to play this with because again I'm not familiar with these colors as much as I am with green, which is probably obvious at this point. But I could see this working with cards like Brash Taunter, things that might cost a little bit more mana wise, but are ones with really good effects that sort of undermine the fact that they are 1/1s, and then just buff Zinnia off of that. Or just play a bunch of cheap stuff. That also works. And then nuke everything with Zinnia. That's probably your game plan. And then Miss Bumbleflower, I think is the last one we're covering, is also the last pre-con commander we're covering, is essentially just Group Hug. I mean, which is pretty obvious because whenever you cast a spell, the target opponent draws a card, and they put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature. Can be yours, by the way. Keep that in mind. It can be your creature, giving it flying until end of turn. And when that's the second time that ability has happened, you draw 2 cards. So this is essentially going to be a Group Hug deck, except, well, you have a knife, and that knife is going to come in the form of Cloning Hydra. Because we're doubling the counters again. And then you give everything flying, and then double the counters, and everything dies. So, on a serious note, I think this commander is going to benefit a lot off of counterplay, not just +1 counters, but also like counter spells and other really cheap stack interaction pieces, because it really goes in on that idea of you casting as many spells during everyone's turn as possible, because it's for each turn. So past the second spell cast, it doesn't really benefit you. But if you can cast 2 spells during each turn throughout a turn cycle, you're going to benefit a lot. Like, you're going to be benefiting a lot off of that. Like, you could potentially draw 8 cards in 1 turn cycle. Like, just with a pot of 4, if you're playing that. So I think Miss Bumbleflower could be really good. It kind of just really depends on how you want to do that. So that's really all I got for that. But either way, I'm sorry. I got nothing for that. You play I expropriate's the one card that comes back at the very end. Why am I like this? But yeah, expropriate would actually probably work in this deck. That's so mean. Either way, I'm so done with this. Bloomburrow is silly. I really enjoyed some of the cards that came in here, some more than others, which are going to be fairly obvious. But I'm planning on doing more videos like this, obviously with more time and thought put into them. This is my first go around at it. But I know I could definitely do better with it, and that's the plan. This is probably the longest video I've ever made. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. For everyone who is still here, and I'm gonna see if I can start doing this a little bit more often. Either way, I hope this gave you some ideas, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one. Peace.